Broadcasting live 4 days a week worldwide
from the sunny beaches of Southern California.
This is ExtremeHealthRadio.com.
Well, hello there. This is Steve Hines from Hope Wellness Center in Cunha, Mexico. And I love listening to Justin and Kate because they provide such cutting-edge information. Tune in live every day to get inspired and learn about natural health. Dr. Feelgood signing off.
Oh my gosh, I laugh every time I hear that from Dr. Hines, don't you? Dr. Feelgood.
Signing off.
Signing off.
Oh, that guy gives me a chuckle.
Oh my gosh, that is so funny. I just can't believe that he said that.
Oh, he's a goof. He's so knowledgeable, but I love his funny side. He is
incredible.
Funny.
Yeah, he's really funny.
That made my morning.
Yeah, you're working with him, aren't you, in St. Angelo, Texas?
I am, yeah. I've done some work with him, and he's ordered me some great tests, and we're working together, so it's good.
Dr. Feelgood signing off. Thank you, everybody, so much for joining us on another episode of Extreme Health Radio. We apologize for yesterday's show. We weren't able to locate our guest, and so we apologize for that. But we are here today live, and all we have is now, right? So we appreciate that. And what's today's episode? This is 260?
260.
Episode 260, so you can find all the show notes on that page. And for reference, this is June 5th, 2014, and it's Thursday. Is that correct?
Correct. Wow.
Time is
You're on it.
Flowing by, isn't
always.
it?
Yes, sir.
And let's see, there's lots of different ways to join the show. If you'd like to do that, you can go to extremehealthradio.com/live and listen to the live show. Join the chat room. Ask your questions that way. You can always send a voicemail to us, too. You can record a voicemail straight from your computer. So there's lots of different ways to join the show. And if you'd like to support the show, a lot of people are doing this these days, and it's really helping a lot. And what they'll do is they'll go to extremehealthradio.com/Amazon, and they'll make all their Amazon purchases through our link. And there's a link on our website in the top right if you're interested in doing that. And that's a great way to support us, and we get a little commission for your order. You can buy anything. Doesn't have to be health-related. That's a great way to keep the shows free for everybody else and help pay the bills around here.
We are so grateful, you guys. Thank you very, very much. It keeps the cogs rolling over here.
That's right.
Turning.
Keeps the lights on, like Tom Bodette.
Right.
Keeps the light on for you. We broadcast live 4 days a week on Monday, Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday at 9 a.m. Pacific. So feel free to join us on any of those days to listen to the shows. Basically, we take Tuesday off. Is really what that boils down to.
A day of rest.
And today, a day of rest on Tuesday.
We need one.
Today is going to be a fun show because we are going to get into this whole digestive
mystery.
What really happens when we eat? And we're going to be talking with Dr. Norm Robillard. I'm sorry. I'll never get that correct.
It's a hard one.
It's a hard one. And he's a PhD. His website is digestivehealthinstitute.org. He's not a medical doctor, but he's a PhD. He works with people with a variety of different digestive health issues like small intestinal bacterial overgrowth, SIBO as he calls it, SIBO, acid reflux, irritable bowel syndrome, celiac disease, Crohn's disease, diverticulitis, chronic constipation, and all that stuff. And he's the author of a couple books called Fast Track Digestion for Heartburn and Fast Track Digestion for IBS. So it's really going to be good to talk to him. So through the magic of the internet, we're going to be taking everybody to
outside of Boston.
Thanks, Dr. Billard, for being on the show.
Hi, Justin. Hi, Kate.
Hello.
Nice to be here.
You know what? I messed your name up again. I said Billard, and it's Robillard, right?
Billard works. We'll treat it like a nickname.
You know what? In the chat room, I did that this morning, and people call me Stin, so I guess it works both ways.
We'll both be confused by the end of the hour.
I appreciate you being on today. So you are just outside of Boston. Is that what you were saying earlier?
Correct. Yes, I'm in Watertown, Mass. It's about 5 or 6 miles from downtown Boston.
Oh, excellent.
Just far enough to have my own garden.
Oh, that is so beautiful. And so you grow lots of your own food?
I grow. During the summer, we try to grow as many of our vegetables as possible. We tend to plant a lot of greens and broccoli, cauliflower. Of course, you have to have tomatoes, number of squashes. The usual. I stay away from some of the more starchy veggies.
Starchy veggies meaning like carrots and maybe beets and things like that?
Yeah, carrots aren't too bad, in limited quantities. Beets as well in limited quantities. I wouldn't grow potatoes, although some of those aren't too much trouble for digestion if you pick the right ones. But I just don't tend to eat a lot of starches myself.
So
I gain weight on them.
Yeah, that's a lot of people. So how did you get started with the whole digestive, going down that path in your life?
Well, it was pretty much an accident. I suppose a lot of people say that. My background is microbiology. I'm a research microbiologist. And thank you for reminding your listeners that I'm not a medical doctor and they should always check with their own doctor before changing their own medications or even making, significant alterations to your diet. But having said that, I have worked in the biotech pharma industry for a good part of my career. So doing a lot of research on various medical conditions and working on new drugs, some of those life-saving. So it was really a great experience. But meanwhile, I had my own digestive health issue that came up. Sometime in my 30s, I had chronic acid reflux. And it was a very challenging condition for me. And the drugs just didn't seem to really be doing the trick. And there were also a lot of side effects, and I'd read about some health risks for some of these drugs, PPI drugs, H2 blockers. So one day, it was about 7 or 8, almost 10 years ago, I went on a low-carbohydrate diet to lose a little weight, but my acid reflux completely went away. So I was just shocked by that, and I should have just been happy that it did go away. But I got curious about it. There had been a small clinical study done that other people were experiencing the same thing. Carbohydrates was somehow causing acid reflux. And I think I was just lucky that I had a background in microbiology because I started thinking about this and doing a little research, and I came up with a new idea that carbohydrates, if you had a lot of carbohydrates in your diet, many of those go unabsorbed. Instead of getting absorbed into your bloodstream, fully broken down and absorbed, they can persist in the small intestine. And I had this idea that perhaps these excess carbs in my diet were feeding like a bloom or an overgrowth of these of my gut microbiota, these bacteria that live in my gut. And this was before I knew anything about SIBO. I came up with this theory and wrote a book about it called Heartburn Cured, which was a low-carbohydrate diet approach to treating acid reflux. So from there, I just continued to tease the problem apart further. I talked to some authors and friends. I had met Dr. Mike and Mary Dan Eads, who wrote Protein Power. And Mike actually helped me think through the problem to come up with an even better diet where you didn't have to limit all carbs, just the ones that were the most difficult to digest and most likely to drive these kinds of blooms of bacteria.
That's so interesting. Norm, do you have, by chance, our live chat up? Because I think we might be getting a little bit of feedback from your
Is that
computer.
where that's coming from? Yeah, because it is a little distraction.
Yeah. If you go onto our live chat page, there's a little thing on the top left. There's a picture of my wife and I, and underneath that, there should be a little way to turn that off.
Turn off what?
There should be a little indicator of a speaker down at the bottom left underneath our little picture. It's right to the left of the chat room, and hopefully that will...
Oh, let me see if I can do that.
Sorry about that.
Yeah, I didn't know if you were hearing it or I was just going to deal with it.
No, that's okay.
I couldn't figure it out for a second.
Sometimes I forget to do that too. So,
a speaker, I don't see.
Or if he can just turn off the noise on his computer, he can just put his volume down.
I can just close the web page as long as you relate the questions to me.
Yeah, that's no problem.
Sure.
That'll work out perfect.
How's that?
Yeah, perfect. Perfect.
Now we're not distracted.
So in your research,
is so much easier now.
Yeah, right.
I know. Sorry about that.
So in your research, you were finding that these this carbohydrate was somehow getting into the small intestine, and that's where...
Because it has to go somewhere, like you were saying. If it wasn't being digested properly, it's going somewhere, though.
Yeah, so that's where the problem was happening?
Right. So, if you want, for some of your listeners, we could just back up and talk a little bit about gut bacteria. Why are they there? And it might put things in perspective.
Yes.
Let's do it.
And then we can get onto this kind of SIBO or this overgrowth.
Mm-hmm.
Great.
So, the short story is that we've evolved with bacteria in our intestines. Mm-hmm. And so since the beginning of time, they've been there. And most of them are in the large intestine. And there's lots of them. And there's lots of different types. So we have some 100 trillion different bacteria in our large intestine, belonging to over 1,000 different species.
Wow.
It's immense. It's like our own little Brazilian rainforest. Mm-hmm. But they really help us, and they've helped us survive over the years when food was scarce. And the reason is, as I said before, we don't digest all of the carbohydrates we consume. Fibers, and there's over 10 different kinds of fibers, resistant starch, even some protein goes unabsorbed. And so that continues through our small intestine, and if you're healthy, most of it ends up in your large intestine, where all of these different bacteria begin to break it down. And so that's what's in it for them. They get energy from all of these foods that we don't digest when they break that down. But for us, there's some perks too. All these bacteria, first of all, compete with other disease-causing bacteria.
Okay.
So, for instance, if we have a healthy gut, we have less of a chance of getting C. difficile infection and other infections from the bad bacteria.
Okay.
So they're good in that regard. They also help train our immune system overall from at a very young age on. And then they produce vitamins and some things that we don't make. So they give us some vitamins. And most importantly, when these bacteria break down these fibers and starches, they produce fats in the form of short-chain fatty acids. Wow. And, online, butyrate is the rage, and how to get more butyrate. Well, that's one of these fats, but there's also lactic acid, propionic acid, and so forth. So there's others. And
so these things will actually create fat out of carbohydrates?
They will. That's and it's the same principle that is used when you raise beef, right? Basically, these steer are eating grass and they're turning it into fat, and that's really what they're digesting is the fat the bacteria make.
Okay.
And so it's the same idea for us. And if you compared our digestive system to a Hyundai or maybe a Prius, right? We tend to get we get much better gas mileage from the food we eat when we have these bacteria present. Okay. So we're about 25 to 30% more efficient in getting calories from food with the help of these bacteria.
And is it true what I've heard about people? I've heard people say that we're supposed to have around 1,000 different species, but with all the antibiotics and things going on these days, a lot of people are below 300 different species. Is that going on, do you think?
I think it is going on. So, in fact, it's interesting that you put a number around it because I don't know what that number is. And I don't know what that number was. 10,000 years ago, we may have had 10,000 species. I don't know. Wow. And I really don't have a good read on the exact number right now. But one thing that is clear is that with more preservatives in the foods that we eat and taking antibiotics, which we weren't doing before, say, 1940 or so.
Right.
Really does deplete the diversity of our gut microbiota.
How does the preservatives, we've heard a lot about the antibiotics, but how does the preservatives do that? Well,
don't forget, preservatives are meant to keep food from spoiling, right? Mm-hmm. So to keep microorganisms from overgrowing. Uh-huh. So, of course, there's some natural preservatives, like lactic acid, right? That's one of those short-chain fatty acids that bacteria make. For instance, right, you've heard of lactic acid bacteria. They make lactic acid. And the reason they're healthy in the small intestine is because that acts like a bit of a preservative to keep some of the other bacteria from the large intestine from migrating and overgrowing in the small intestine. So lactic acid is a preservative, but it's a good one.
That's interesting, because
the synthetic ones, who knows what they're going to do or what they're going to kill.
Right. Who knows how they're going to interact with all the bacteria that are supposed to be there, and perhaps maybe there's this collateral damage going on like we're doing on the planet where you're killing off a certain species and you never get that species back again.
Yeah, it's going to be a challenge for us.
Isn't that wild? So the preservatives, and then the people are taking the antibiotics, and then I'm sure, do chemicals or heavy metals or anything like that, do they affect in a negative way our bacteria?
Well, I'm sure they could at sufficient levels. I think the question really is how much of these are really in our diet, and is it really a problem? And honestly, I don't really know the answer to that myself. It's not an area that I focus on.
Right.
I hope not.
Wow. Okay. So people should have about 1,000 of these different bacteria or different species, strains. And so how many bacteria should there be? I think you said it a couple seconds ago.
So I think the number that gets tossed around is 100 trillion.
100
trillion. Oh my gosh.
10 times the amount of cells that humans have in their body. But the reason they fit there and they only weigh about 3 pounds together is because they're very tiny.
And is it true that these bacteria actually, like when we eat food, tell me if I'm wrong here, but as far as I understand it, when we eat food, it's not as if the food, the vitamins and the minerals from the food somehow pass through the villi into the bloodstream, but they somehow get transmutated through the bacteria. The bacteria does something to the actual food we eat, and then it's the result of their output, and that's what we get. Is that correct?
Well, I think that goes on for certain foods that we eat, but for the most part, vitamins and minerals in our diet are absorbed into our bloodstream.
Okay.
Now, some, of course, need additional factors, like intrinsic factor is produced in the stomach to help absorb vitamin B12.
Okay.
So if you're taking PPIs and you don't have enough intrinsic factor, you're going to have difficulty getting enough B12, even if you take supplements. So you really need the intrinsic factor to get it in. But in most cases, if you're healthy, these vitamins and minerals will be absorbed. I think one of the biggest problems comes from when you have either low stomach acid, and that's why I'm against these acid-reducing drugs, because we need acid to absorb calcium and magnesium and iron in particular, probably other things. And so when you have low acid, you don't get enough of those, and so it's well documented that there's results of that. They can measure that people on these drugs have low blood magnesium levels. They also don't absorb calcium to the point where they can get brittle bones, kind of an osteoporosis type condition, and more frequent fractures.
Wow. And so that somehow, the low stomach acid is somehow precipitating all this? Absolutely.
And so the other part of the equation is in your small intestine, and we'll be talking about this today, right? This idea of SIBO, when you get these blooms of bacteria from your large intestine growing in your small intestine, that's a problem because that's where you have all of these villi structures, little like carpet fibers that line your gut. They're structures, and then they have on top of them, they have little microvilli, little tiny cells that all are meant to absorb all of nutrition, right? So the fats turn into fatty acids, the carbs turn into sugars, converted to sugars, and proteins to amino acids. They're absorbed through these villi and microvilli. So we have this huge surface area, but it's also very delicate. On the ends of these microvilli cells, there's enzymes right on the outside of them that help complete the breakdown of some of these foods, particularly carbohydrates. And so when you have bacteria growing in your small intestine, of course we talked about these short-chain fatty acids, but they can make some toxins, they produce a lot of gas, and they can cause damage in this area and limit the absorptive capability of our villi and microvilli. So there's a lot of reasons you don't want that going on.
Yeah.
Dr.
But
Norma,
absorption of adequate nutrition is one of the main ones.
Absolutely. I think we're going to take a quick break here, but when we get back, there's some talk in the chat room that there's some curiosity about how we can increase our stomach acid without possibly taking hydrochloric acid capsules. And then my question for you when we get back also was, is there anyone who actually in this day and age has enough stomach acid? Ooh. So I'm curious about that, because I'm wondering if we're also altered that, there's not a person that exists now on this planet in this day and age that doesn't need some help in that area. So.
Yeah, good stuff. All right, we're going to take a little break, and we are with Dr. Norm Robillard from digestivehealthinstitute.org, and we'll put a link to his website on the chat room, and we broadcast live 4 days a week, Monday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday at 9 a.m. Pacific. If you'd like to join the live show and ask questions and listen as the show's going on. So we appreciate you guys so much, and we'll be right back with Norm right after this break. If you have any digestive problems whatsoever, I highly recommend getting a Squatty Potty that sits right underneath your toilet. Squatty Potties help give relief from constipation and bloating, hemorrhoids and straining, IBS, pelvic floor, and bladder issues. See, as humans, we are designed to squat when we eliminate, and when we sit on a toilet, that angle kinks and pinches off the puborectalis muscle in your colon. And the Squatty Potty opens the colon to eliminate more quickly and completely. Listen to what Daniel Vitalis has to say about that.
One of the reasons I love to promote the idea of the squat toilet is because, for a couple of reasons. One, there's a ligament that wraps around your colon that prevents you, when you're in the seated position, from being able to have an effective bowel movement. But that ligament's loosed when we're in a full squat. So people are fighting their own body to defecate this way. Now, in the rest of the world, people defecate in the squat. Use a squat toilet. I'm so big on this. I've got a video on my website about that. But I really believe that it's important we start to actually defecate in an anatomically correct position. So, nobody sits on chairs to defecate except people in the West. And we have more rectal and bowel problems than anybody, more constipation than anybody. But this actually puts our body in a disadvantageous position for trying to go to the bathroom. So if you don't have a squat toilet or don't want to invest in one, I don't know, stack some books up. But get something where you can actually squat up above the toilet, or at least get your knees up higher.
Justin and I love our Squatty Potty. Start improving your digestion and elimination today by going to extremehealthradio.com/squat or see it in our store. Again, go to extremehealthradio.com/squat and watch the video to learn more.
So a few years ago, when I was working for this company, it was a really small company, and I had been wanting a Vitamix blender for years and years and years, but they're so expensive, and I just hadn't saved the money at that time to get one. And so as a Christmas bonus, they knew that I loved the Vitamix, so they got me a Vitamix, the 5000 blender. And that thing is so incredible. It was right at the beginning of my raw food journey, and I was using it about 3 times a day, really. Today, I still use it about twice a day to make blended smoothies and things like that. But the Vitamix blender is really, really great. And if you go to extremehealthradio.com/Vitamix, that will redirect you over to there, and then you'll be able to purchase that, and we'll get a commission for your order. And you'll also get free shipping, too, so that'll be great for you if you're interested in saving about $25 on the shipping. And with the Vitamix, you can make sauces and dips and bread. You could make ice cream with it. I've done a lot of ice cream. You can just make the most incredible things. And it's my favorite because it's got a tamper on it. And you can put ice and frozen berries and avocado and some honey and things like that, and with no water at all, and you have that tamper, and you can make the most amazing ice creams with it. So the Vitamix is my favorite blender of choice, and if you're in the market to buy one, I would greatly encourage you to do so if you have the money for it. And if you do it through us, through extremehealthradio.com/Vitamix, I'll get a little commission for it, and you'll get free shipping. So it works out for you and for us too. So if you're in the market, please do it through us. That'd be really cool. And you're going to love this thing when you get it. You're going to fall in love with it. You'll never go back to a regular blender again. So check that out, extremehealthradio.com/Vitamix, and I hope you enjoy it.
100% listener supported. Extreme Health Radio. Opening minds and transforming lives worldwide. Don't forget to join our thriving community for health tips, inspiration, and show updates at extremehealthradio.com/Facebook.
Tallahatchie, roll over me.
That's what we're sticking with.
That's what the man is singing here. Tallahatchie, roll over me.
Our one person, our one listener who actually spent an hour or two trying to find this song. That's what he said, so we're going to go with that.
I like it, though. Yeah. I think that's, I'm going to have to look into that.
Tallahatchie.
This is episode 260, and we're with Dr. Norman Robillard from DigestiveHealthInstitute.org. And just want to let everyone know he is a PhD, a molecular biologist, and a microbiologist, and he's not an MD, so just want to let everyone know that he's not a medical doctor, so you should always consult your medical doctor if you want any help with your digestion, because we all know they're the only ones that can help with digestion. That was my sarcastic little comment there, but we're having a great time here, and I had a couple questions before the break. I think, Kate, right? You wanted to ask a couple things.
Yeah, we were asking Dr. Norm about, first of all, does anyone in this day and age naturally have enough stomach acid? And second of all, is there a way to get more stomach acid without having to take HCl caps? What are your thoughts on those?
That's a complicated question. So I'll give you a few thoughts on that. So first of all, it was thought for a long time that stomach acid, that as we got older, we made less stomach acid.
I've heard that.
And it was thought that? Is that what you said?
It was thought that. Okay. And I recently read a book on this whole, it's actually called Chronic Gastritis and Hypochlorhydria in the Elderly. So hypochlorhydria is what it's called when you don't have enough stomach acid, right?
Okay.
Because I was curious about this question. And it turns out that that's not, in fact, the case, that oftentimes older people even have more stomach acid than younger people. That really surprised me. So there's been a lot of studies, but of course studies are always done in different ways, and some of them are more meaningful than others. So the bottom line is there's no real rhyme or reason, but you shouldn't conclude that just because people get older they have less stomach acid.
Interesting.
Now, having said that, there are certain things that can impact our ability to make stomach acid. H. pylori infection is one of those, but not always. Sometimes people get an H. pylori infection, they make more stomach acid. So it depends where H. pylori is infecting the stomach. Because certain parts of the stomach is where the cells make acid, and certain parts make regulatory hormones and so forth. So it's interesting that it's not just cut and dry. But certainly, if you have low stomach acid, you should be checked for H. pylori, because it could be, depending on where the infection is located, the driver of that. Another one is atrophic gastritis, which can be related to this H. pylori infection. That's the condition that can lead to hypochlorhydria. But there's also an autoimmune version of that, where your own body starts attacking the cells that make the acid. And then the last one is cancer. So there's three things. But the other thing I found reading that book was that there's more people than I thought that actually don't produce enough stomach acid. Forgetting about age for a minute, just looking at the entire population.
Okay.
And so there are a lot of people out there with low stomach acid, more than I realized. I don't have the number in front of me, but more. And so I think the second part of that question is what to do about it, right?
Right.
And that's also a tough one. I think probably the first thing you should consider is H. pylori, because if you've got low stomach acid and H. pylori, this is one case where you probably should get on an antibiotic cocktail to get rid of it. The other thing is you can look at what other things could be driving this. The thing that I didn't mention, and probably blows away the other three by far, and that's if you're on any kind of acid-reducing medicines, you have low stomach acid.
Now, how
you get it to yourself by taking those. So the first thing is to look at those, and if you're on them, find a way to get off them and address. Usually, the reason for taking those is acid reflux. Find a way to address acid reflux without taking these drugs. That's what fast track digestion is all about. The volume on heartburn, at least.
Do we know how long these things will affect someone's hydrochloric acid in their stomach? Is it a lifelong hit they take, or does it just last for a certain amount of time?
Well, again, it's going to depend on the cause, but the single most important thing people can do is really look at H. pylori and look at whether they're taking any kind of acid-reducing drugs.
Do you think it would be beneficial for someone to get their stomach acid tested before they start taking hydrochloric acid supplements with their meals?
That's what I was wondering too.
Yeah.
That's a great point. Absolutely. I wouldn't do it myself. Why would you do that if you didn't know if you had low stomach acid? Because while we have a nice thick mucus coating on our stomach, that why challenge it with more acid if you already have enough acid? Because if that does become thin, then you can really begin digesting your own stomach lining with the acid and the enzymes, stomach enzymes. So you should be tested and confirm that you have low acid before taking those. I feel anyway.
So how do people test for it? Is it a saliva test, or how do they go about getting tested?
No, the way it's done is called a Heidelberg stomach acid test.
Oh, right. Okay.
And they basically swallow a little capsule. It's like a little micro machine that measures the pH or the acidity in your stomach.
Gotcha.
Interesting. I've heard different people talk about different sort of home self-tests you can do, and they'll do different things like they'll take a certain amount of hydrochloric acid pills with, or a certain amount of milligrams, I should say, with a meal, and as soon as they start to feel a warming, then they know that they've hit their upper limit, and then they need to start coming down. I've heard different doctors talk about doing things like that, but I would probably guess the Heidelberg test would probably be the most accurate.
Well, it would, and I'm told that it's not always available, and so you'd have to ask around and find somebody that did it.
Okay.
Interesting.
Of course, just taking more acid until it starts burning, I mean, I know I'm familiar with that approach. Some people do it.
Yeah.
It wouldn't be something I would recommend.
Yeah.
We have a question in the chat. A guest is curious about your views on taking baking soda.
Oh.
Speaking of acid.
Good question.
Well, that would be my dad. That's his solution.
Yeah.
He loves his carbs.
Yeah.
Take baking soda. But anyway, it's not hasn't killed him yet. He's 81.
Oh,
wow.
So yeah, he's doing good. So baking soda is a lot like an antacid, right?
Okay.
It's sodium bicarb, and it's going to neutralize the stomach acid that you have.
Mm-hmm.
In one regard, I think it's better than going on one of these drugs, either a proton pump inhibitor or an H2 blocker, because those inhibit stomach acid for a long time. PPI is the longest, and then H2 is also for 4 or 6 or 8 hours.
Okay.
So at least when you take an antacid or some bicarbonate, you're neutralizing the acid that's there, but you're not stopping your stomach from producing it. So I would say it's the lesser of the evils. Obviously, it's best if you can have be on a diet that doesn't promote the kind of bacterial overgrowth we were talking about. And there's a whole reason and theory I have about why reflux is caused by these bacteria. But if you can fully digest and absorb your carbs, you shouldn't have the problem to begin with.
I see. I think you have a couple other questions.
Norm, we have a guest in the chat room just dying to ask you 2 quick questions. She said, "Hey, Norm, I was wondering the best way to rid Candida when one is having reoccurring Candida." And the second question is, "I have also heard that yogurt is good for Candida because of the probiotics, but when I have yogurt, I get bloated. What are your thoughts on those?"
Interesting.
So this is interesting. Candida, it's a fungi, and it's one form of overgrowth that people can get, although exactly the relative number of people that have that as opposed to just a general bacterial overgrowth is not really clear to me. But when I approach any kind of problem like this, or imbalance or overgrowth, I really first want to look for what's causing it. It's easy to just jump to, I need a solution. What can I eat? What can I take? But I really like to take a moment and try to understand what's driving it. So in the case of a yeast overgrowth, typically what's happened is either antibiotic use, right? Because it wipes out a lot of bacteria and it gives the yeast a chance to grow. Having some yeast in your intestine is not unusual. Most people do.
Okay.
And it can be part of a healthy digestive system. So, but like anything, you don't want it to overgrow.
Okay.
And so, looking at taking antibiotics is one thing. Also, if you have any kind of problem with your immune system, whether you were ill or whether you were taking certain medicines that limited your immunity, that can also be an opportunity for yeast to gain a foothold. So, and then once it does, like certain bacteria, these yeast, right, and there's other species of yeast that are used in brewing and so forth, right? Similar with these strains, they can make a lot of gas. And so they really can drive, some pretty significant symptoms. One good news about yeast is, like the bacteria in SIBO that we use the fast-track diet to correct, yeast also ferments sugars to produce gas.
Okay.
So while I don't have any specific data on yeast, it's reasonable to assume, and a lot of the Candida diets are based on the same concept. If you can limit their food source, right, which is sugars and carbohydrates, then you may be able to, your immune system may be able to kick in and take over, and your peristalsis and motility keep things moving and clear it out. So that would be my first suggestion. Try to understand what caused it and stop, if you can, stop doing any of the things that caused it. And also treat it by really carbohydrate restriction.
Okay, that's a big deal for people.
Before reaching for an antifungal drug or something.
Yeah, that's a big deal.
Yeah, in the chat as well, another guest says, in regards to SIBO, I'm keeping it under control with colloidal silver and soil-based probiotics. Do you have any thoughts on that? Is that a good call?
Well, I mean, silver has antimicrobial properties. So as long as you don't take too much, I think there's a video of the blue man out there somewhere. But
yeah, we've heard about that guy. Yeah.
Don't want to take too much of that. But
yeah.
And he died. I think he died of cardiac failure too.
Yeah, he just died recently.
Yeah. So I wouldn't take too much of that. But other than that, I don't know an awful lot about the use of silver in that capacity.
Yeah, a lot of people are dealing with.
As far as the soil-based probiotics, I think it's an interesting product. It hasn't been out there for that long. I think they've done a couple of small studies, and unfortunately, a lot of the symptoms of SIBO, which is synonymous with the symptoms of IBS, they didn't look at a lot of the more important symptoms of IBS, the bloating and the altered bowel habits and so forth. So, I don't know if they didn't look at it. It's not in the paper. So, but they looked at a few of the other symptoms and they found some improvement. So I think it's something people could try. Okay. But why don't we just take a look for a moment at probiotics for a minute in general, forgetting about individual types.
Okay.
I have a couple of thoughts on those. First of all, there's one perfect probiotic. It's absolutely perfect in every way.
Okay.
Unfortunately, it's not on the market.
Uh-oh.
And that is healthy poop.
Yeah. We've heard about that. People have been having some pretty good success with fecal transplants have you heard about this thing they're doing in Australia with kids who have never been exposed for a couple generations to antibiotics and vaccinations, and then they take their fecal matter and implant it into autistic children?
Yeah, it's unbelievable. If you can find people that haven't been on antibiotics, it's great. Yeah. I actually met Dr. Barodi, who's basically the leader of that, the whole fecal microbiota transplantation program in Australia. I met him at the Digestive Disease Week meeting last year, where I was presenting a study we did, a small clinical study on our diet for heartburn. But I met him at the meeting, and he's an amazing guy and very funny as well. But I mean, he pioneered the technique to treat people that had Clostridium difficile infection, C. diff, that has very high rate of chronic illness and also mortality if it's left untreated. It's a very terrible condition where you can have diarrhea 8 times a day. It's horrible. And many of the antibiotics, you have to take lots of powerful antibiotics to get rid of this because Clostridium difficile makes spores. So it's very tough to kill and wipe out, and these spores can get around the doctor's office and in hospitals, so it's easy to get reinfected. It's a real problem. And the antibiotics were becoming less effective for these infections. And luckily, this fecal microbiota transplantation process has a 92 to 98% success rate for C. diff.
Oh my gosh.
unbelievable. And so I talked to him. He was explaining to me the success rate, but he's now moving on and using it. He's interested in treating people with ulcerative colitis, with Crohn's, and a number of other conditions. And you mentioned autism. I'm not familiar with that particular piece of work, but it's amazing. And so there's the perfect probiotic, is healthy poop, because it mirrors what a microbiota complement should look like.
Do you know how they do the implantation and how they, how strict they are with the samples and stuff like that?
Well, sure. You have to screen the samples for a whole variety of diseases and so forth, because you want to make sure you're not going to get something infected with something new when you're trying to treat your condition. So they have to be screened, and they have to be taken and stored carefully. I think there's probably a lot of work that's ongoing now, or should be ongoing, to really improve that, especially the sample taking and preserving, because most of the bacteria in our intestines are obligately anaerobic. It means they hate oxygen. There's no oxygen in our large intestine, and so if you expose these bacteria to oxygen, some of them might live 20 minutes, but there are others that will die in 20 seconds.
Oh, wow.
If they're exposed to oxygen. So taking the samples maybe anaerobically and trying to protect them from the oxygen and so forth. So there's ways this is going to be improved even more. And the other thing I was getting to is, if you want to make a great probiotic, I mean, if you can pick the major representatives of our gut microbiota, clean those up and purify and put them in a capsule, that would probably be much more effective than the probiotics on the market currently.
Yeah, it's amazing. Yeah, it's just amazing. It's amazing. We're going to take a little break now, but who would have thought you would have been on the radio talking about fecal implants for different types of situations and poop like this? But
we always seem to talk about poop.
Yeah,
it all comes back to it.
Fascinating stuff, though, and I think it's interesting, too, because, I wonder, with the rise in the use of antibiotics around the world, if in the future, 50, 100 years, 200 years in the future, if you're going to be able to have clean samples from children or from people that have not been exposed to antibiotics and vaccinations, stuff like that. But when we get back from the break, I want to talk to Dr. Norm about something he talks about in his books called Fermentation Potential. And so he talks about these in different ways in terms of numbering different foods, and you can find out what foods are going to most likely ferment. So
I have a question as well when we get back.
Good. Okay. Awesome.
Let's do it.
All right. This is episode 260, and we're with Dr. Norman Robillard from digestivehealthinstitute.org, and we'll be right back right after this break. The history of heat therapy dates back over 2,400 years, and it was Hippocrates who said, "Give me the power to produce fever, and I will cure all disease." This FDA-approved medical device called the Biomat is a mat that you can lay on, read on, sleep on, do yoga on, sit on, and it can be used on office chairs, massage tables, and the like to help the body heal itself. It's inlaid with 30 pounds of healing crystals using amethyst and a rare black tourmaline, producing negative ions in a healing electrical field. These healing crystals help to restore cellular health by replacing electrons to the atoms, as well as penetrating deep into the body by 4 to 6 inches. What can the Biomat do for you? It'll improve your skin, burns as many calories as if you went jogging for 30 minutes. It improves the immune system by up to 40% or more, reduces stress and fatigue, removes toxins, lowers cholesterol, relieves pain, revitalizes cellular metabolism. It improves cell channels to deliver nutrients and oxygen to every one of your cells. It activates over 3,000 enzymes. And even a Harvard medical study showed cancer cells die at over 42 degrees Celsius. It reduces stress hormones by up to 78%. It allows your body to produce heat shock proteins, which increases endorphins, NK cells, T cells, and lymphocytes. It's very, very low EMF, and it's got a 17-layer technology. Dr. Mark Serkis is the director of the International Medical Veritas Association. Explain to us more about these biomats.
These biomats are these far infrared mattresses. You lay on them, or you sleep on them, or both. You do very heavy treatments during the day, and at night you sleep at just a nice comfortable temperature. These biomats are like these love machines, comfort machines, and healing machines. Because what they do is they just radiate out light, far infrared light, and you can radiate yourself all night long while you're sleeping when you're not doing anything else. And what happens is this light penetrates the body and turns to heat. And the first thing that happens when you bring your core body temperature up 1 degree is your immune system strength increases by 40-50%. They feel when you lay down on them, you know, you guys know, you have one. So it's like the feeling is so good. It's like being in the cuddling with a lover, your wife or husband. It's just warmth and comfort.
How are you using biomats for patients in your clinics?
You know, the cancer treatment using heat is very aggressive, meaning during the day, you sandwich yourself in between two of them, turn it on to high heat, and bake the cancer. The cancer will die before you will. No, this is, you know, you can go to England and spend $20,000 and use microwave a cancer out of existence. These biomats basically do the same thing. You know, radiation therapy for cancer is really a solid idea. Unfortunately, oncologists use the wrong radiation. They use radiation that kills you. This biomat uses radiation that can save your life and make your life more comfortable, keep you warm in the cold, and help take care of your kids and all, you know, the list doesn't end.
Yeah, because isn't there some sort of temperature at which cancer cells will start dying?
Right, and it's below the temperature that human cells will die.
So you really like this biomat far infrared technology, don't you?
But it's strengthened me. Well, now the kids are addicted to it. You know, they fight on who's going to sleep on it at night. And it not only changed my life, but it changed my medical practice and my books. This is a great machine for anybody who lives in the cold during the winter. Instead of heating a big house, you just heat yourself. Bottom line, it brings good feelings. Just lay on this biomat, and it gives the strength back.
I can attest to that indeed. Kate and I love ours, and we think you will too. Learn more about these amazing biomats at extremehealthradio.com/biomat. Or you could check them out in our store as well. Again, that's extremehealthradio.com/biomat.
All free shows, all the time, on Extreme Health Radio. Opening minds and transforming lives worldwide. Join our community today. Sign up to our email list and instantly get our free gift to you, along with loads of inspirational content and cutting-edge tips to help change your life at extremehealthradio.com/subscribe.
And I just want to let you guys know, if you're interested in signing up to our newsletter list, that's probably the best way to stay up to date with everything, because Facebook is really strange these days. I'm not sure what's going on with Facebook here, because when we do posts and let everyone know about our shows, we're finding that not a lot of people see the posts. So I'm not
tricky Facebook,
tricky Zuckerberg, that character,
shady character,
shady character. So probably the best way to stay up to date is through our newsletter series. So there's places to do that on the website as well as at the bottom, and you get access to a free ebook that we give away that's actually sells for $20 on Amazon called Lessons from the Miracle Doctor. So you want to check that out and stay up to date with our shows. It's a great way to do that. And this is episode 260, and I'm going to call him Dr. Norm because I keep wanting to say Robillard, like, you know, billiard tables, but I know that's not right. So
you need to be French.
I need to be French. I think that's what it comes down to. If you guys have any questions about the biomat that we just ran the ad for, it's an incredible machine. We use ours every single day. So if you have any questions or if you're interested in that, check that out on our website. So I'd love to help you out with any of those questions if you're interested in the biomat. And we broadcast 4 days a week. And let me just give people our upcoming show schedule really quickly. Let's see. Tomorrow we have our Free for All Friday show. And then on Monday we have Carrie Rivera, and she'll be talking about autism and MMS. And next week on Wednesday we have Dr. Richard Massey. He'll be talking about recall healing, family constellation therapy, blood analysis. And then Daniel Vitalis next week on Thursday talking about sacred sexuality revisited.
Oh, wow.
That'll be interesting.
Yep.
So lots of stuff going on here on Extreme Health Radio. So don't forget to follow us on Facebook. Sign up to our newsletter so you can stay up to date with everything we have going on. Dr. Norm, before the break, we were talking a little bit about this fermentation potential that I know that you talk about in your books. Explain a little bit about what that is for people.
Okay. Well, if you want, I can tell you a little story about how it came to be.
Yeah, please.
Ooh, story time.
Maybe I can explain it that way.
Cool.
Because it all began in your neck of the woods down there.
Oh, okay.
Southern California.
Nice.
I was living in Thousand Oaks when I had come up with this theory, right, why carbs were driving acid reflux. Because they promote the overgrowth of bacteria. I didn't even know it was SIBO at the time. I'd never read about SIBO, but I had this theory. It turns out it's the same thing. Overgrowing gas-producing bacteria in the small intestine produce a lot of gas. And being a microbiologist who used to grow a lot of these organisms, including intestinal bacteria, when I was a postdoctoral fellow, I knew these bacteria love carbs and they produce tons of gas. 30 grams of carbs can give you 10 liters of hydrogen gas. So, and it's explosive too. That's the reason there's explosions. There's been explosions during intestinal surgery. So you can get a lot of gas down there.
Sorry, Dr. Norm. Can you say that again? Did you say 30 grams of carbohydrates produces that much?
30 grams of carbohydrates.
Oh my goodness, that's like some. I see these sports and energy bars and things like that. Some of those have just one bar will have that much.
There you go, right?
Oh.
So you can get a lot of gas. Of course, your body's trying to process it all the time, but still, you don't want it building up quickly like that.
Amazing.
So I had this theory, and all this gas building up created pressure, intragastric pressure, right? That would move from your small intestine into your stomach. And by the way, it's well documented that people with GERD and acid reflux have this pressure. They didn't know where it was coming from. So my theory was the bacteria were producing the gas, creating all this pressure, and driving acid reflux. Similar to those YouTube videos of dropping a Mentos into a bottle of Coke. And so it was a radically different idea than what had been thought to be occurring with relaxation of this sphincter muscle on top of the stomach and so forth. It was a complete departure from that theory. And in my books, I present a tremendous amount of evidence for that. So I won't go into that now. But when I had this idea, I got in touch with this Dr. Mike Eads, right? He and Mary Dan Eads wrote Protein Power, best-selling authors. They were living in Santa Barbara at the time, and I was in Thousand Oaks. So I got in touch with him, thinking he wouldn't even take my call, actually. But sure enough, he was very interested. He had reflux himself. He had written about treating acid reflux with a low-carb diet in his own book. And so he agreed to get together. And I became friends with Mike. And he was a very, very good listener, and he also liked to think about these kinds of things. And so he came up with a really key question. And that was, he said to me one day, do you think all carbs trigger acid reflux, or are some worse than others? Can you devise, and he called it a heartburn barometer, to help people avoid the worst carbs? So it was that question that really sent me on my way for the next few years to figure out which carbs were the worst, and how could you tell if they were in the food you were eating. And so through some research, I came up with this short list of difficult to digest carbohydrates that would be most likely to drive this overgrowth of bacteria. And they're fructose, lactose, resistant starch, fiber, and sugar alcohols. And so I had the list, but I wanted to know how to put it into a diet operationally that people could use. Other than, nobody wants to become a nutritionist and study every single piece of food they have and try to figure out how much of each of these things are in food.
Who wants to do that, right?
It's a nuisance, right? You might give up.
Right.
So, I was playing with all these mathematical formulas, and it was really, I just wasn't really getting anywhere. But all of a sudden, I had this one idea. And that was to use something called the Glycemic Index in a different way that it was being used. The Glycemic Index compares carbohydrate containing foods to glucose, because glucose is absorbed in the bloodstream quickly. Our body spends ATP to get that glucose into the bloodstream very quickly and very efficiently. So they call that 100%. 100% absorbed. So in the glycemic index, they give people trials with glucose, and they determine how quickly that goes into their bloodstream. They actually measure it by taking blood samples. And then they give them the same net carb amount of the test food. And they do this to like 10 people, and they do it several times. So they actually get some statistical data out of this. And what they're trying to figure out is how is what's the glycemic index of the food? How quickly are the carbs in that food digested compared to glucose?
Okay.
And so it was all about blood sugar. And so I reasoned that you might be able to use the glycemic index and turn it around somehow mathematically to measure the carbohydrates that remain in the intestines that are not absorbed into the bloodstream.
Oh, so the remaining carbs that sit in the intestines, that makes sense.
Exactly. And so I ended up with this formula, and I'll read it to you. It's not that complicated. FP, or fermentation potential, equals 100 minus the glycemic index, that's in parentheses,
Okay.
times the net carbs for a particular serving of food, divided by 100, and then you have to add back dietary fiber and sugar alcohols, if sugar alcohols are present, for that same serving size, because dietary fiber and sugar alcohols are not part of the glycemic index formula, right?
Okay, right.
And so that gives you an answer in grams for a serving of any food, if you have the glycemic index, or even if you have an estimate of the glycemic index, to tell you how many grams of that will remain in your intestines, potentially driving an overgrowth of bacteria.
So obviously this is all anecdotal in a sense, because we don't know what's happening in everybody's intestine, but it's pretty safe to say this is what's going on.
Well, I don't think anecdotal is the way to put it, but you bring up a good point. The glycemic index, these values, and there's some 2,500 to 3,000 of these values out there. So there's some big databases with this information. And in our book, we have used the glycemic index to determine the FP, or the fermentation potential, of about 360 foods.
Oh, wow.
So to get some sense, there's quite a few foods. And then, of course, you don't really have to worry about meat or eggs or fish or seafood, anything that's protein-based, and oils and things like that, and also sweeteners unless they're difficult to digest, like artificial sweeteners have an FP of 0 and so forth.
Okay.
So there's a lot of information out there, but it is tested in several people, and so there is some statistical validity to it. But you're right in that the test is done in healthy people.
I see.
Right? So for lactose, the fermentation, the glycemic index of lactose is something like 20.
Okay.
Look at the book as we're talking. So it's really low, but the question is, would it be even lower? And if they tested it, it's 48.
Okay.
Glycemic index for lactose is 48 in healthy people. But if you did that test in people that were lactose intolerant, it might be 20.
Right.
So, and I make a note and a footnote in my book under that table specifically to that point, that if you are somebody that has difficulties digesting and absorbing carbohydrates, the effective glycemic index might be lower, and then the effective fermentation potential might be higher for you. But even if that's the case, you're still better off eating low FP foods.
So
right?
you have about 300 of these foods that people can kind of look at and see, okay, this has a potential to ferment in my stomach and cause all kinds of issues.
Right, exactly. And I call it potential because it's doesn't mean it's always going to happen, and some carbs are likely to be worse culprits than others, right? Like if you have some cellulose fiber, that's very tough to break down. It might not be as threatening as some of the other carbs. Same with this raw unmodified potato starch that people are taking. It turns out it's actually fermentable, but not as fermentable as some of the other ones. So fructose and lactose, could be worse in some of the polymers, the polyfructose molecules. So, but by saying potential, at least it identifies all of the carbohydrates that can potentially feed an overgrowth of bacteria. So if you limit those, you should be able to get your symptoms down to a baseline where then you can try individual foods and see, well, I want to try this potato starch, so I'm going to have some after I feel well and I have no symptoms. I'm going to try changing just that, where I add, quarter teaspoon of raw and modified potato starch, because I've heard it gives me vivid dreams. But so you can test things in yourself once you get to a baseline.
So, do you have a bunch of foods like fruits and things like that people can look at and determine what the FP potential is for those?
Absolutely. Wow. Shoot, give me one and I'll tell you what it is.
Well, how about like different kinds of rice? Because that's such a popular food around the world, and people love to eat rice. How about like, I don't know.
Rice is a great one. So some rices, right? Like basically Uncle Ben's rice.
Uh-huh.
Right? That's one a lot of people can relate to. Mm-hmm. That has a lot of resistant starch in it. So a 5-ounce serving has about 20 grams of FP. Okay. So that means, right, we said 30 grams can give you 10 liters of gas. Mm-hmm. So 20 grams could give you 7. Imagine 7 balloons filled with gas in your intestine. Now, if you switch out that Uncle Ben's rice with, say, some sushi rice, glutinous sticky rice, same serving size, 5-ounce serving, you're now down to about 3 grams of FP.
Wow.
It's a big difference. If you went to jasmine rice, the FP is 0.
FP is 0. Is that the only rice with an FP of 0?
That's the only one with 0.
Wow.
That is so strange. How come we heard that from a friend that it was, out of all the rices, the culprit for digestibility was the least. Justin and I really still can't eat that. Why would that be for some people, do you think?
Yeah, I can't answer that. There could be other factors or other things or something you were reacting to in there. But most people, and I deal with a lot of people on this diet, really find jasmine rice to be quite an improvement.
Oh, that's great.
Do you recommend things like enzymes and digestive? We take like digestive bitters and things like that to help digest food. Do you think that those are good things?
My immediate preference for myself is to eat a whole food diet.
Okay.
Is to get everything I need from my foods. Now, having said that, my approach, and I told you about this before, was really to try to figure out what exactly is wrong before choosing a treatment, right? So if you are lactose intolerant, and there's lactose in all kinds of foods, and say you want to still continue to eat some, but they're problematic, right? And by the way, if you're Northern European, you have a greater than 80 or 90% chance of being lactose tolerant as an adult. But if you're from any place else in the rest of the world, you have about an 80% chance of being intolerant.
Oh, wow.
So there's a big difference. And so most people are lactose intolerant as adults. Mm-hmm. Now, you can probably tolerate some small amounts of lactose. Like most of the lactose in yogurt is gone. There's a little bit there. Mm-hmm. Hard cheeses that are aged, so they're very much fermented. They don't have much lactose at all. But something like milk has a lot more lactose in it. Light cream and heavy cream actually have small amounts of lactose, so those would be a better choice. But if you want to continue to eat lactose-containing foods and you're having some symptoms, by all means, take a lactase enzyme supplement. So all I'm saying is I like to know what I'm taking and why I'm taking it. And for most things, they won't hurt. Most of these types of supplements for enzymes and so forth, they won't hurt you that much. And so you can experiment with them. But sometimes over the years, problems arise. For instance, when kids with cystic fibrosis, right, they have a very difficult time digesting foods because their pancreatic ducts, the tubes that lead from their pancreas to deliver digestive enzymes to the small intestine, they get plugged up with the same mucus that clogs up their lungs. And when they're plugged up, they don't release these digestive enzymes. So a lot of these kids have to take protease, lipase, and amylase, the 3 different types of digestive enzymes. And so they've really refined these supplements for these kids. So those are the best ones to take. Now, as they were going through this process, they found that if you gave kids too much lipase, the enzyme that digests fat, that they could end up with this condition where they had scarring of their intestines. Very dangerous. So in most cases, people will be fine. But I'm just saying to take things without reading a little bit about them or understanding the history or why you're taking them, I don't think is a good idea. I think the more you can learn, the better. And then take it. So my approach is really less is more. But when you really need something, by all means, read about it and then take it. But make sure it's from a reputable supplier and so forth.
Yeah, got to learn to know why you're taking it.
That makes sense. Dr. Norm, there's a question here in the chat room for you. They want to know if you know of any ways to improve motility, which I believe is the emptying of the digestional or the stomach tract. They say Trifala worked for a while and Ibergast works so-so. Do you have any thoughts or knowledge on that?
Sure. Well, when you have any kind of problem like that, it always makes sense to really try to understand why, what's going on. So when you have a motility issue, if it's due to scarring or surgery, those can be very challenging conditions, right, and very hard to mitigate. So, and beyond the scope of this conversation, frankly. Mm-hmm. But there are other factors in motility issues, right? And slow motility is basically constipation, right? You have a hard time moving this stuff through your digestive tract. Mm-hmm. And so some work that has been done by Mark Pimentel's group, Dr. Mark Pimentel out at Cedars-Sinai in LA, mm-hmm. has been really eye-opening on slowed motility or constipation. He found, when he was doing hydrogen breath testing for people that had SIBO, mm-hmm. he found that there were basically a couple of different types of gases that could be bacteria and other organisms that would overproduce gas. And the people with a lot of hydrogen gas tended to have more diarrhea type conditions. But people that overproduced methane gas almost always had constipation.
Wow.
So it's very new and it's really interesting. But there's these organisms called archaea. It's not bacteria, it's not human, it's its own life form somewhere in the middle there. Whoa. But they look like bacteria under the microscope. But these things consume hydrogen that other bacteria make, and then they produce methane. And that methane is somehow involved in constipation, so it's really interesting. But one thing I tell people, in addition to this, I have a list I go through for people with constipation. Getting more fats and oils is always good, getting more water, drink a lot of water. But one of the things I focus on is if, in fact, this methane is linked to constipation, and these organisms need to ferment hydrogen to make the methane. Uh-huh. If you can stop the hydrogen production, you'll stop feeding those archaea. So that's why I recommend people get on the fast-track diet, because by limiting these carbs I talked about, these 5 carb types, you'll limit the hydrogen gas, and you should have less methane gas as a result.
That's just fascinating. I want to talk in just a second about your fast-track diet and your books, too. You got 2 books that are out, as well as your consultations you can do for people. But in closing up the show, I just had just one final question about what are your thoughts about things like enemas and colonics, or maybe herbal cleanses that people do? Do these affect digestion, and what do you think about these kinds of things? Well,
the least invasive approaches, I think, are always best to try first.
Okay.
If you can modulate your diet and let your natural, the cleansing wave, the motility that we have, get to work properly, I mean, that's the best. But I've counseled people that actually depend on taking enemas to move their bowels. Mm-hmm. And so you have to do what you have to do. Mm-hmm. But I just say try the least invasive first, and then gradually work your way up. And of course, when the more complex or invasive your treatment gets, the more you should really be talking to your doctor and even a gastroenterologist mm-hmm. to get the best advice possible, so that you don't make things worse or cause a different problem.
What about colonics or herbal cleanses? Are you a fan of those?
I'm not. I have to say I don't know as much about them as other people might, so I don't want to really slam them, but it's not something I recommend or think about that much personally.
Isn't it wild? Just a couple seconds ago, you're talking about this methane gas that's produced by the bacteria the hydrogen and things like that. It's just amazing, isn't it, that in 2014, how little we really know about the human body and what's going on. It's just amazing.
Oh, it's unbelievable. I mean, the next 10 years are going to be so exciting. We haven't really even talked about research into the gut microbiota, but I mean, there's so much going on. I wrote a couple of articles on resistant starch on my website. One's called Resistant Starch, Friend or Foe, and then the next one I take it up a notch. It's called Resistant Starch, Friend, Foe, or Lover.
Wow.
But I talk about the microbiota changes in people that have irritable bowel syndrome. And it's very interesting. We know that there's a link with the SIBO through Pimentel's work. Since the 90s, he's been working on that, by the way. His team is amazing. But there's also some general gut microbiota changes that are being associated with people that have IBS. And to generalize that, there's some, tends to be blooms or overgrowth of certain Firmicutes type bacteria, and they're basically carb-loving, gas-producing. And a decrease in overall diversity, in particular a decrease in Bacteroides species, right? And those are more the ones that tend to thrive on animal products, right? So there's a decrease in those. There's a decrease in bifidobacteria. And it's interesting, those strains tend to be less gas-producing than some of these Firmicutes. So it really plays in to some of these concepts about bacterial overgrowth, gas, and symptoms.
That's so amazing. How do we know that there are, like, let's say, I mean, what do they do? Do an autopsy on someone and actually count the bacteria? I mean, how do they count the bacteria and know that there's 300 or 1,000 different species and then all the different kinds? How do they know that?
Well, some of the early work was done on some people that would die, and they would just basically rush into autopsy and get a sample. But mostly these days, it can be done analyzing poop, first of all, right? Again, you're only getting a sample from the large intestine, though, so you're not sampling the small intestine. But they do have devices that you can attach to a scope, and you can sample the small intestine. And so that's what some of that work was done to identify some of the species that are present in SIBO. But a lot of the work really depends on this breath testing. So you're measuring hydrogen and methane. Those gases are only produced by microorganisms. Humans don't produce any methane or hydrogen. Wow. So they're actually measuring it on the breath, because when these microorganisms produce those gases, they're absorbed into our bloodstream and exhaled when we breathe out through our lungs. And so they capture them in a little tube, take them back to the lab, and they measure them. So it's an indirect measurement, but it's still quite good. I mean, it's there was a meta-study done to show that this breath testing is actually a good way to look at irritable bowel syndrome to confirm the diagnosis. That's
just so amazing. Like you said, you know, the next 10 years are going to be incredible. I wonder what we're going to learn in the next 10 years. I wonder if what we're going to learn in the next 10 years completely turns the tables on everything we know now, or if it's just going to exponentially, you know, quadruple in terms of what we know about what's going on in the gut, how many bacteria, how they interact with each other, how they interact to different types of medications and things. I think it's just going to be an amazing time.
It's going to be fascinating. But until then, my strategy is less is more. And that's what I tell people I work with, and that's what we promote in our books as well.
So people can, I'm looking at your website, and I saw a consultation link, so people can contact you either by phone or by Skype, right? Absolutely. So, in fact, we consult with people all over the world now. So it's been really a great experience for me, and it's something that we're just lucky to have the technology that we can do now. That's so great. It's interesting because on your list here you have asthma, and I think there's a connection between asthma and acid reflux and things like that or something. But it's just amazing all the different conditions that you will consult with people about. Irritable bowel syndrome, celiac disease, Crohn's, IBS, heartburn. And so absolutely. And asthma is fascinating. 80% of kids that have asthma have acid reflux, and nobody could figure out why. So I wrote a long blog article on asthma and acid reflux on the website that people can read. But if I could get a grant, I would be studying this tomorrow, because I really think that we can mitigate asthma
with a diet like the fast track diet, because if you can get your bacterial overgrowth under control, you can stop the reflux, and then you'll stop refluxing various enzymes, bacteria, other things from your digestive tract into your lungs that I really think is exacerbating asthma. And it's not the acid alone, because there was a huge study done, several studies, but one called the SARA study, multi-center, all over the country, multi-center study, thousands or hundreds of, maybe even over 1,000 kids with asthma, and they put them on Nexium. They reasoned that if reflux is causing the asthma, it's the acid, and if you can just neutralize the acid, the asthma should go away. Well, it didn't make one bit of difference.
Really?
So it is somehow the reflux, but it's not the acid. So I think there's other things in the reflux that are exacerbating asthma, and so we have to stop the reflux itself. And that's what the Fast Track Diet book series is all about.
Wow. So you have the Fast Track Diet for heartburn and for IBS. Is the Fast Track Diet concept in both books so they understand what the diet is?
It is. It is the same concept and the same formula for the diet. Of course, the recipes are all different and stuff like that. But it's the same approach, but one's geared towards IBS, the other towards heartburn.
So if someone wants to basically just improve their digestion, let's say they don't have heartburn or IBS.
That they know of.
Yeah, that they know of, exactly.
They don't have it yet.
Yeah.
Get on a diet like this when you're young.
Yeah, that's the key.
I know. What book would you recommend for someone who just basically feels healthy and they want to improve their digestion?
I'd say for somebody that just wants a general reading, to choose the IBS one, only because it has an extra chapter in it on antibiotics that I think people might find interesting.
Okay. And so are you working on more books as well?
Absolutely. Of course.
Wow,
Always.
there's only 1,000 different digestive disorders, isn't there?
No, it's not enough time.
Amen.
Well, thank you, Dr. Norm, for being on the show. And I'm not going to pronounce your last name because I'm going to butcher it again. And so I apologize for that. But thanks for being on the show today.
No problem. My pleasure, Justin and Kate. And thank you very much for letting me connect with your listeners.
Oh, so amazing. If you want to get in touch with him, Dr. Norm, it's digestivehealthinstitute.org, and you can go on there. He's got a link at the top for a consultation, and then he's got links for a couple of his books for heartburn and IBS. So I would highly recommend checking out his work and amazing information. So Dr. Norm, stay on the line. We're going to close out the live show here, and I just want to thank all of you guys that are listening live. We really appreciate it. It's just so much fun to have you in the chat room.
We have a lot of people in the chat room thanking him for his time today.
Oh, good.
He's a fave. They love him.
Yeah, amazing information. So I think that if you get into his books, you'll probably get more into all these different topics that we wanted to cover in today's show. Perhaps we'll have him on again, and we can talk more deeply about some of these subjects. But
yes,
thanks for being on the live show. This is episode 260. We broadcast 4 days a week live on Monday, Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday, except for Tuesday.
Yep,
I got it today.
Everything except Tuesday.
And what we'll do also is we'll create a little forum thread in our forum, which is free to sign up, by the way, and it's free for all the Extreme Health Radio listeners. And we'll put a link to the specific forum thread that will be discussing this episode, which is 260. So, and we've taken good notes for you, so we'll put all the notes in this show page as well. So I want to thank all of you guys for listening live. We really appreciate it, and we'll catch you on the next episode.
Bye, guys.
Well, there you go. We got everything covered.
This is wonderful. I love it.
Well, thanks, Dr.
Thank
Norm.
you.
We'll talk to you soon, okay?
Take care, you guys.
You too. Bye-bye.
Thanks. Bye-bye. Oh, Dr. Norm Robillard, right?
My cheeks hurt from laughing.
He's
being
great.
offline with him is just he's funny.
Oh man.
You know what I like about him?
No.
I like about him specifically, and people like him. They're so science-minded, but yet they're so personable.
Yeah.
I love that combo. It makes for such an interesting talk. And I mean, off the radio, we got to joke around with him a lot and see his personality really shine through. But man, people had so much love for him in the chat room. They just love him.
Yeah, it's really cool. And you know what I like about guys like him too is that it's funny when, he's obviously very passionate about his work and he's really into this stuff, and so are we.
Yeah.
But he does all the research and all this, scientifically minded stuff, like you're saying.
Sure, yeah.
And so it's funny when someone like him talks and, and he cracks a joke every now and then, you're not expecting it because you're kind of in that science mode, you know?
Exactly.
And he did that a couple times.
That was great.
He's great, huh?
I really enjoyed him.
So he said off the air that, 30% of celiac patients do not get better on a gluten-free diet.
That's what he said.
Isn't that wild?
And then he's going to leave me hanging, he said, until the next show, because we're going to get him back on to do a celiac/Crohn's or colitis, I believe it was, show only because, when you have an astronomical number like that of people not getting better.
30%.
I can't wait to have this conversation. It's going to answer a lot of people's questions about, because celiac is running rampant, Crohn's is colitis running rampant.
Yeah, everyone seems to have it, doesn't it?
So gluten-free diets are not the answer for people. I want to know why now. I'm wondering if it has to do with the sugar that you get when you're adopting that kind of a diet, or
it sounds like there's certain people have, like the sugar gets into the small intestine when it shouldn't, or it gets stuck in the large intestine when it shouldn't. But then it's so fascinating too, because you have all these things going on with the bacteria. And think if you have 600 species of bacteria. I mean, first of all, think of having to name all those and how they interact with one another. Let's say someone has bacteria A, for example, or call it number 1.
Yeah, 299 trillion. Bacteria 301 trillion. I mean, how do you name these things?
I know. So if someone has, bacteria number 1 and someone else has that, and so you say, okay, both these two people have bacteria number 1, but you might have bacteria number 1 and I might have it, but you might have 1,000 times more of just that one type of bacteria than me. But if you look at us on a schedule or on a piece of paper, we both have bacteria number 1. And so because you might have 1,000 times more of it than I do, it's going to interact with bacteria number 312 differently than my bacteria 312.
Right.
I mean, it's just an amazing, I don't think we have any idea of what's going on. Like he said, the next 10 years is going to be fascinating.
Isn't it though?
Yeah. What do you think about that one thing he was saying about how it's not a bacteria, but it's not a human?
Yeah.
Whoa.
It's only.
What's that all about?
I feel like that reminds me of, was it Andreas Kolker? Was it the episode with him talking about the ropeworms and how there was basically like some DNA that wasn't decipherable? It's like alien DNA.
Yeah, that's right. It was some sort of not bacteria, but parasite or ropeworm or something that was. Yeah, it was not.
Same thing where I'm like, what are these organisms that are basically indescribable and just open up a can of worms, literally, bacteria that nobody knows what the heck it is. It's frightening, isn't it?
It is very frightening. And I think a lot's going to come out in the next 10 years. I think a lot of what we know now is just going to be kind of overturned, and we're going to not believe the kind of stuff that we believe anymore. I think new science is going to show new things, and I think it's going to be amazing. It's going to help people with digestion. But at the same time, you have the pharmaceuticals pushing vaccinations and pharmaceutical medications more. So you have this really weird dualistic thing happening where the consciousness is rising. People are learning more. We're understanding more about what's going on in our gut. But then on the flip side, you have more and more sick people because they're taking medication. They're watching TV, asking their doctors for Nexium and things like that. Prilosec or whatever. I don't know what they call it.
You and I try to sit there sometimes and make up funny names. That was pretty fun. I like doing that.
I know, right?
You can come up with some crazy medical names or for medications. But yeah, no, I agree with that. I like how he said basically the referral for if you're just the average person who maybe doesn't even have digestive problems and wants to know more about this, or you have slight, bloating and digestion. He said he would go with the book Fast Track for IBS. And then he said that one's a good one. I like how he added in that there was an extra chapter in that one about antibiotics and things like that. Because I want to know, what is taking these strains away from us? And basically we're killing off good stuff. We're getting all this alien bacteria of other stuff, and it's causing this whole, like you said, dualistic kind of
I think it's almost
process going on.
If you were to look at our gut, it's almost like the gut of today is something, it's almost like an alien thing in terms of never before in human history has there been this sort of interaction with this many types of weird and strange bacteria being introduced, and as well as certain bacteria being killed off. If you were to look at our gut And if you could see all the bacteria like life-size action figures or something like that, it would probably be something akin to like a battlefield that you would that never before in human history have our guts of humankind look the way they do now. Because there's bacteria that should be there that are not, and then there's bacteria that shouldn't be there that is. And then you got this weird interaction between all these things that are happening that we don't even know what they are. I bet it's just so no wonder why people have so many digestive issues, because don't they say that, what is it, 70% of people that go to doctors go there for stomach problems or digestion or
symptoms?
It's pretty wild what he was saying about how we're 100 trillion different types of bacteria, which is 10 times more than the cells of our own body.
Is that he said 100 trillion or 300 trillion?
Anybody's
guess.
Yeah, anybody's. Who's counting, right?
Who's counting? How can you count?
I mean, it's fascinating. We're more other cells than we are our own.
I'm picturing like a Braveheart scene going on in my gut right now. The battlefield of all this stuff, all this bacteria, like just insurmountable. I think it was interesting. Was he talking about methylene and what was the other type of gas he was talking about?
Methane and...
Methane, not methylene.
Something start with an H.
Yes. The different kinds of gases that can be produced from eating, what do you say, 30 grams?
30 grams, yeah.
Isn't that crazy?
Yeah, 30 grams of sugar.
Or sort of carbs.
Of carbs, yeah.
Well, basically the same thing, but...
There's a lot to get to, isn't there? There's a lot
There's so much, because I feel like, you and I always complain about being bloated. And we always think it's the sugar, and it very well could be, but it's like, if that kind of gas is building up and putting pressure on the organs, like, no wonder we're always like... Hurting, bloated. I mean, this is quite the journey for people with digestive issues, to not be feeling like that one day is like... You can get through one day feeling amazing. It's a big victory.
Yeah.
But I wonder if it's just, a buildup of gas and funky bacteria that kind of took over. I have no idea.
I love the analogy he gave in the show. He said that imagine having like a couple of balloons filled with air inside your intestines.
Right.
I mean, that's pretty incredible. That's what's probably going on in most people. And if you think about, those balloons are displacing other organs like your large, small intestine. Those balloons are displacing your liver, your gallbladder, your pancreas. And, those things aren't doing their job. Maybe they're getting squished because the balloon of the gas is causing those organs to change their shape and they don't work correctly or something.
My poor balloon guts. I feel bad for my little guts.
My poor balloon guts. I love that.
Oh, you like that?
Yeah, it's pretty wild, isn't it? It would be a amazing thing to understand what's really happening, though, I tell you.
We get closer every guest we have to figuring it out, and yet farther away, because I was saying in the chat room to one of our guests, like, it's so many voices, so many things, and our bodies are so different. There's so many factors, But I'm grateful for every resource we can have, because one resource could be someone's answer, and another resource is a whole slew of other people's, problems and answers. So
yeah, I might refer people to his digestivehealthinstitute.org and his consultation page, because it looks like, and I would also recommend people to his books too. I think you can get them on Kindle as well. We'll put links to those on our show page here if you're interested, or you can buy them off his website. Either way, extremehealthradio.com/ what is it, 260?
260.
Yep. Excuse me, I just burped, and that probably has something to do with gas or bloating or something.
It's your balloon digestion.
My balloon digestion. Excuse me, everybody. But yeah, that was Dr. Norm Robillard. I want to say Robillard from digestivehealthinstitute.org. And stay tuned. We have some great shows coming up. Like I mentioned before, we have our Friday show. Then next week we have Carrie Rivera on autism and healing MMS. I'm sorry, healing autism with MMS.
Oh, with it, yeah.
Dr. Richard Massey with Recall Healing, Family Constellation Therapy, Blood Cell Analysis from awakeninghealth.com. And Daniel Vitalis talking about the sessy bits.
The sessy bits, people with sessual bits.
Sessual bits. Sacred Sexuality Revisited. There's something to be said about that.
That's going to be a good one. People will love it.
Sacred Sexuality.
Anything that's out of the box on this show.
I know, right? So I want to thank everybody for joining us. Thanks for joining us on the live show if you caught that live. And we're going to put a thread to the chat room if you're interested in that. So please sign up to the forum and join the forum. It's free to sign up, and you can discuss all of this stuff and perhaps maybe what's worked for you or what your questions are about digestion. All that can be found in the forum, and you can get support from other Extreme Health Radio listeners. And it's a Facebook free zone.
Facebook free zone.
The other day,
we love that.
Zuckerberg tried to sign up. I said no. You can't sign up.
You
I call him Zuck.
You deny Zuck. You and Zuck. Yeah, okay. The Zuckmeister.
Zuckerberg. So thanks everybody for joining us. I think that's about it, right?
I think so. Thanks, guys. That was a lot of fun.
A lot of fun. Thank you so much, and we will catch you on the next episode.
Thank you for listening to this episode.
It's time to go for now, but our mission does not end with this show.
Justin and Kate will be back with another interview packed full of ideas, discoveries, and unique ways to regain your health.
Head on over to extremehealthradio.com/subscribe and instantly download our free gift too that contains cutting-edge strategies to start making healthy lifestyle changes today.
No material on this blog is intended to suggest that you should not seek professional medical care. Always work with qualified medical professionals, even if you educate yourself in the field of live food, nutrition, and alternative medicine. I'm not a doctor, nor am I offering readers medical advice of any kind. None of the information offered here should be interpreted as a diagnosis of any disease, nor an attempt to treat or prevent any disease or condition. While information in this blog